Hello. It is February 1st, 2021. This is Late Nights with Lance, Winchester, Virginia's favorite late night talk show. I'm your host, Lance Gunnar Wines. And in this episode tonight, we're going to be going through my month of January. It was definitely a very hectic, crazy month for everyone, but especially for me. I took some time off from the air, and I apologize if anyone missed me on the air. But thanks to the good deed and good nature of some of my close friends, I'm back with some new equipment in what I can only consider to be a makeshift studio. And, it's good to be back. I appreciate the audience coming to listen. And this episode tonight is going to be sort of a rundown of my month of January. It's going to be exciting and personal and an emotional roller coaster, as is per usual. And so I hope that you get something from it, but if you don't get anything at all, you'll at least get a rundown of my month and sort of an understanding of why I've been radio silent. So yeah, it's good to be back on the air. It's good to be, speaking on Winchester's favorite late night talk show, because it's Winchester's only late night talk show. But yeah, we'll be back after a short break. This is your host, Lance Gunnar Wines. Thank you. All right, guys, and we're back. And so I just kind of wanted to get into. I have a list here just because things are easier with lists of what kind of went on this month with some dates and some important stuff. So yeah, I guess I'll start from the beginning. This episode is pretty much the catch up. The month started obviously with New Year's Eve, going into the new year of 2021. My first podcast was actually made, I guess, the night before New Year's Eve, so late December of 2020, and it was sort of an emotional post about how I was lonely and how I was upset because I didn't have a New Year's kiss or a New Year's date, and it wasn't that I necessarily, missed a person per se, or that it was, extremely personal to one subject. It was more of just the symbolism of New Year's being a new beginning and welcoming that with someone special, and I didn't have that, and so I was upset, and it was a long podcast of me going deep into the emotional depths of my soul. So I'm not going to do that as much with this episode, but we do have to start with the beginning. So New Year's Eve, I know Shelby is listening in. Shelby and Brian are listening in. For New Year's Eve, we had a small get-together at the Camacho household. So it was myself, obviously, Alex and Kelsey, and Brian and Shelby. And then over the airwaves, through FaceTime, Amy and Wayfan were present, and then Jose, who was hospitalized at the time. I believe he was still at the Winchester Medical Center at that time. And then we did talk with Elsie and Tyler and Joaquin and Sierra and Victoria. So shout out to all of them if they're listening. But, it was a pretty good get-together in the Camacho household. It's always fun to be with the gang. And, everyone brought up the podcast and how silly it was and how goofy of an idea it was. And, the typical Lance roast fest that it is when we get together. But Shelby actually had listened to the whole first episode. People had seen it, obviously I had shared it on Facebook and Instagram, and so my friend group had seen that I had created a podcast, and they had, clicked the links and gone to the actual page, but Shelby was the only one to actually listen to the entire hour-long program, and, she obviously had a few comments. Everyone had comments, but she was joking about, how serious I was about not having a New Year's kiss. And, when you're with Alex and Kelsey, they always have jokes about what you can kiss and where, essentially. But, we had a great night. We played some games. We exchanged gifts, which was lovely. They're very thoughtful with their gift giving. And so we get to New Year's. I know this is the part that Shelby was really looking forward to, so I couldn't neglect to mention it this time. But I did, in fact, have a New Year's kiss. So everything I said in that first podcast episode, the very first episode about not having a kiss and feeling lonely and, essentially worthless, it comes from a deeper place, I guess. But I did have a New Year's kiss. It was platonic. It was actually with Brian. He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek on New Year's Eve when the clock struck midnight. So I started 2021 with a platonic kiss with a male friend of mine. So, if that's a sign for the year to come, that's a pretty good sign, I guess. It was nice to know that, I guess Shelby had listened. She had sensed what I was feeling in that first podcast. And I assume that she, not being one that would want to kiss me herself, it's okay. She could beat me up, but she's not one to kiss. I guess her and Brian discussed, hey, he needs this. And so, yeah, he, turned to his right and kissed Shelby. And then he turned to his left and, gave me a kiss on the cheek. And I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt listened to, I felt loved in that moment. And I really needed that. So I appreciate that. No shame being on the air telling the world that my New Year's kiss was a dude. So yeah, it was a great time. Shortly after that, we went our separate ways because everyone's bedtime is like 9:30 except for me. So, I mean, that's why it's called Late Nights with Lance, right? But that night, I do want to give a shout out to Jose. He's been in the hospital. I can probably link his GoFundMe page to this podcast, but, I just wanted to give a shout out. He gave some very thoughtful Christmas gifts, even though he couldn't be there with us to open them. And it's been a hard year for him already. It's been a hard month. It's been 2 months really. But he definitely has had a hard start to the year. He's fighting. He's in the hospital, and he's fighting the good fight. And we're ready for him to be home. So I just want to give a shout out to Jose for New Year's Eve. A quick thanks to my friends for really stepping up and making it the day that I needed and that I felt that I really wanted deep down. And I think they knew that. So, yeah, that was the first of the month. And moving forward, I guess, a week or so, January 9th of 2021 was the 1-year anniversary of the passing of my father. So yeah, we're hitting the hot button topics tonight. But like I said, it's just a rundown of my month, and it wasn't the greatest month on record. Obviously, I had bad luck in January and February, but it's part of the story. So January 9th was the 1-year anniversary of my father's death. It's something that's really sat with me. Obviously, it would sit with anyone, but I take things harder than most people. I take things harder than the usual suspects. And, it's been a year of reflection. It's been a year of contemplating his life and comparing mine side by side, which has been difficult. It's something that I don't really recommend if you don't have to do it. But, death is weird. It's so final. It's so, it's just the end, and it's like you just come to this wall, and that's the end of your life. And of course, people have ideas of an afterlife or what happens when you pass away, but in terms of your mortality and in terms of your mortal existence on Earth, it just ends. And what do you do with that? And what do you do with that? What do your loved ones do with that? That could be the topic of every podcast until the end of time for me, because it's something I think about daily. But, thinking about death, and especially in the sense of, your family, your loved ones, your intimate, close circle, and how that, affects your view of life, your outlook on life, it is difficult. And I'm not going to spend an hour talking about that day or talking about what I've gathered from the last year. But I will say that, this year, from January 9th of 2020 to January 9th of 2021, I've really learned, the value of, I guess, just the value of living life to the fullest. I know that that's cliche, but it's true. If you truly only have one go round, and if you don't know what's going to happen before or after your life, and this is all you get, I can't imagine wasting it. And, I have my own doubts and my own personal issues with where I am in life and how much value I think I have or how much value I think that I give. But, if I were to, if I were to die tomorrow, I feel like I've lived a pretty solid life. I feel like I've really gotten so much out of it, more so than I think he did with over 50 years. He had double the time that I've had, and I think that I've been lucky enough to get more out of it. And it's really about that. And it's about living life to the fullest, but also not just going with the flow. There's sort of a fine line there between, living life and taking it as it comes, but also having standards and having expectations and doing all that you can to filter what comes into your life, filter what goes out of your life, and managing those expectations so that you can sort of reap the most benefits from it. It's ebb and flow, give and take, but I feel like I've really learned a lot about appreciation, about taking things for granted, and, it's a shame that just like with Tony Stark and Howard Stark, his father, you learn most of your lessons from those people after they're gone. So that was January 9th, a day of reflection. Of course, it sucks that all this has been going on sort of in the in the world of COVID, where you can't really do anything to sort of celebrate someone's life, celebrate your own special occasions. But when all of this is behind us, I'm not going to say when things get back to normal, because I don't think they ever will, but when all this is behind us, I think that I'm really going to try to find a way to sort of have some sort of eventful physical representation of his loss and the experience I've had since then. Kind of like what some people would consider a funeral or a celebration of life, which we had, but something more for me than for everyone else. Because that's really what I've been missing, or what I've been lacking, is sort of a personal goodbye. Hopefully a personal see you later. But yeah, so that was January 9th. Moving forward on another sad note, I don't want to, keep everyone down. Things do kind of go up and down with this emotional roller coaster. But on January 15th, unfortunately, we said goodbye to my Uncle Bob. My Uncle Bob was my father's brother-in-law. He lived in Front Royal. And that day was just, it was rough. And I'm going to share a brief story. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. But a lot of people don't know about, that part of my life, or about that day in particular. But I'll give a background on who he was, and then sort of how that day unfolded. So, I was born, and I consider myself born and raised in Winchester. It's my home. But, the Shenandoah Valley as a whole is sort of more like my homeland. And my father and his family reside, or, I'll say reside in Front Royal. So, I had a life here and there for different periods of time, and I was really close with my Aunt Tammy and my Uncle Bob. Growing up from birth really till the age of like 5 or 6, they were close with me, just like Aunt Sandy and Uncle Louie were, and just how like they have remained. And I would go spend time with them, and they was a Cocker Spaniel, Angelo. And, Bob was always a cool guy. When you're little, you don't really appreciate the nuances of people's personalities. You don't really understand their emotional maturity or their emotional depth and what they sort of, I guess, have to offer the world. You just look at them as, an adult in your life and what they offer you. And, he's someone that I looked up to and someone that I appreciated and had such fond memories with. But as I grew older and as my relationship with my father and with my father's family became more difficult as it evolved or devolved, there were very few constants in my life. But one of those constants that remained was that my Uncle Bob and, of course, my Aunt Tammy, they always thought of me. I was always in their hearts, and, I was always in the hearts and minds of a lot of my father's family. But I didn't get to see everyone very often. I didn't get to spend very much time with them, as much time as I should have, probably. But whenever I was over there and whenever I saw my Uncle Bob, it was, it was like time like jumped. It was weird. I don't know how else to describe it. It was almost like no time had passed at all, and it was just a natural, healthy, familial relationship, which was nice. It was comforting to know that I could go over there, and even in a time of turmoil, even in times of conflict, even in times of uncertainty, it was like I had never left, at least with him and with my Aunt Tammy, So, moving forward, when my father passed away last year, obviously he had been living with Tammy and Bob. They had sort of become his de facto guardians, I would say. And, alongside myself, they also were there to take on the, I guess, brunt of the experience. I don't know how else to describe it. They were there with me to take on everything that came with his loss, with his death. Because I can only do so much. I mean, I was his heir, I guess, to use the will and trust terms. But, I couldn't really handle all of the intimate adult life death stuff that Tammy and Bob could. And they did a great job of not only, I think, satisfying what would have been my dad's wishes had he voiced them, but also doing a good job of not just including me, I guess, but comforting me and giving me what I needed to deal with that situation. Because it was difficult, and I remember the day that my dad passed away, I was at school, and I got the phone call, and I went running around campus looking for Dean Johnston, and I, interrupted his class. I sort of abruptly entered his class and asked him to speak with me in the hall, and I told him, and, it led to me driving home. And that night, I was home, and it was late by the time I got there, and I had I'll call her a friend, come over and comfort me, I guess I would call it that. And then the next day, I went over to Front Royal to sort of get the gist of what had happened. And I spent the day there, which wasn't really my plan, just because, nothing really goes by plan, or really, you don't really have a plan when someone passes away like that. But I remember I was sitting in their, I guess I'm going to call it their library. It's kind of like my library, their cool hangout room. And I was sitting in this comfortable chair, and Bob was sitting at the computer, and he was listening to all sorts of alternative folk, cool rock music. I don't even know what I would call it. Like the stomp and clap, I guess. And rolling his own cigarettes. And, we just talked. And listened to music and laughed. And, for those few hours that I was there, when it was just him and I in that room, it was like I was in a whole new world. It was like I got to sort of open some sort of like portal or wormhole in the fabric of our reality, my shitty reality, and step through into, my own sort of alternative universe where things were okay. And he was one of very few people that did that for me at that time period and throughout the year, honestly. Not just, I mean, obviously COVID was a part of why I couldn't have the comfort that I needed, but in terms of the people in my life, he in that moment was one of the only people that really, I think, gave me what I needed, which, it was just, I, I don't need to be held as much as sometimes I would like to be. I don't need to cry with someone as much as sometimes I would like to. And I don't always, sometimes I do want to speak, and I don't want to sit in silence and sulk. Try saying that 5 times fast. Sit in silence and sulk. But I was just having an experience with another human being. I was having a shared experience with another human being. There wasn't anything in particular. It wasn't like I had some sort of checklist or quota of what I needed out of it. I didn't need, it's not like I had a list and I need one hug, or I need 5 minutes of crying, or I need, 15 minutes of silence, or anything like that. Or I need to talk about this, and that. I was just having an experience with someone in a way that I could feel the comfort and the intimacy and the compassion and the empathy, because Bob had the ability to communicate that in just who he was. He could communicate that love and that compassion and that empathy without doing anything. It was just, I just knew there was that trust there, that mutual respect that I knew was there, that provided what I needed. And unfortunately, for I guess one or two reasons, one of which is your memory fades from your early childhood, and so there's like that recency bias. And two, because I'll always remember this specific moment because of the events that surrounded it, that's probably, unfortunately, my favorite memory with him. Because it wasn't necessarily a happy memory, but it's like when Harry Potter saw his parents in the mirror. And that was like his happiest memory. And when he was asked, what memory did he use to create his Patronus, he said, well, it's not a real memory. It's an illusion of memory. And that's sort of what this is. It's not happiness. It's just an illusion of being content. So yeah, fast forward, I'm in Richmond, I guess sometime in June. It's probably around June 18th, I think. So Justin's birthday, Morgan Grove's birthday. And I'm at a job interview to be an administrative law judge for the state of Virginia. And I guess it was after I got out of the interview, before I went to lunch. No, it was before the interview. I went to find the building because I'm one of those guys. And then I got in my car because I was going to go to lunch and then come back. Or something like that. And it's not really important. And I got I guess it was a message or a phone call, I think it was Tammy, it might have been Cheryl. And they said that Bob had been flown to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And that I guess he had some sort of neurological symptoms just out of the blue. I think it was like a headache or seizures, things that I have, things that a lot of people I know have. And so he went to the hospital, I guess, in Front Royal, the Warren County Hospital. And I guess they found tumors or growths on his brain. And they immediately flew him to Johns Hopkins. And they were telling me that, he had been diagnosed with brain cancer. Pretty late stage brain cancer. Another one of those moments where it's sort of like you're having like a good day and good memories, and then I guess it's tainted with not so good memories. And it was so strange because it felt like, even though it had been months since I had seen him, it felt like I had just seen him because time works in mysterious ways, but especially in 2020, where a month could last a day or a month could last 3 years. And I felt like a month or so had lasted a day. And in reality, I hadn't seen him in a long time. So, get that phone call, and I sort of take that in. And I guess I didn't really understand the seriousness, the severity of his situation. Um, Cancer is a dirty word, and it's difficult to talk about, even when you don't have it or someone that you love doesn't have it, and you're just talking about it. It's still a difficult conversation. But when it's someone that you love, and it's someone who has it so severe without any notice, like immediately, what do you do? And I spent those summer months, in the Wines family group chat, sort of listening to what was going on, taking it in, understanding that Bob was having these procedures, having these treatments, whether it be, radiation or chemotherapy or any sort of, medications that he was on. And, I guess I didn't really understand. I didn't really get it. It's difficult, and so fast forward, I guess, to around the holiday season. Usually they have like a Christmas get together, big family and friends get together. But that's difficult with COVID, and it just worked out to we get to the new year, and it's just he didn't have long, I guess. And that day, the 15th, I was dog sitting or dog watching for Aunt Sandy. And she got home. I don't know what time it was. Doesn't really matter. And I was talking to Aunt Sandy for like 20, 30 minutes, after I was, I guess, scheduled to leave or whatever. And I get a text from my Aunt Cheryl. And she says that, it's almost that time. And, we'd like you to be here, whatever. It basically just to inform me that it was coming, and that if I wanted my chance to see him, I should go. And I did. I went home, put on a change of pants, and hit the road, I even took 81 to 66, which I never do. But I felt like that was the fastest, and I wanted to go fast. There's that comfort that I feel with my foot on the pedal, and I wanted to go fast, and I wanted to get there fast, and I did. And I got there, and I, said hey to everyone that was there, and I went back to see him. And I don't feel comfortable discussing his condition or those moments, and I don't think it's appropriate, and I don't think that my family would appreciate that. But it was rough. It was definitely one of the hardest moments I think that I've experienced, and I've experienced a lot of those in the last 2 years. And I sat there and I grabbed his hand, and I told him how much I appreciated him and how he really stepped up as a father figure when my own father hadn't. And the last time I saw my dad, which was December 26th of 2019, he joked about me going to visit them for Christmas, for their Christmas get-together. And he joked, that I was excited to visit for Christmas because I got to see Bob, because Bob was always my favorite. I told him that, and I was there with my grandma Sue. I sat there with him for a while, even after I spoke to him. And I tried to speak as loud as I could, just to, speak over the breathing and everything going on. And I sat there with him for probably, I don't know, 30 minutes, maybe a little bit more. I told him I loved him, and I'd like to think that he heard me. He didn't respond, but I'd like to think that, he knew how I felt. So I went into the other room, into that chair that I had sat in with him just 1 year prior when my dad passed away. And I just kind of took it in. I sat there and, I thought about what was going on, and I called my mom and told her. And then a few minutes later, he passed away. And again, it's one of those moments where I think about death and how final it is, and, it's a wicked moment. And my grandma Sue came out into the hall, and, she looked at me while I was sitting in the chair and said, you were the last voice. He was waiting on you. He was waiting to hear you, to say goodbye before he could go. Yeah, and I miss him. I'd like to think that him and my dad, my grandpa Willie, are all hanging out together, talking about football, talking about the Rams and what happened with Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, talking about the Cowboys and how hopefully they can bounce back with Dak Prescott, and talking about the Raiders. And I'd like to think that they're all together, sort of like the three wise men of Front Royal. The three men that were really like my father figures from over there. So, yeah, I think it's a good time to take a break. But yeah, I just, wanted to tell my family out there that, I love y'all and I'm thinking about y'all. And we'll be back after this break. Have you ever sat around listening to your favorite podcast and thought, well, they're just talking about nothing. I can talk about nothing. Why don't I do that? Well, here's your chance. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First and foremost, it's free to use and it's hours of fun. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your smartphone or computer. They then distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcast materials. You can make money from your podcast, and there's no minimum listenership. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. We all need a creative outlet, and this is your opportunity to have your voice be heard. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's anchor.fm to get started. All right, and we're back. So this is a little bit lighter, but it's not like super light. But around that same time, Jose was also transferred to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. On my notes, I have it down as the 19th because that's when I shared his GoFundMe page. I think that's when it sort of, his stint at Johns Hopkins really was at like a peak. And he's been dealing with these issues where they thought it was cardiovascular. He was experiencing symptoms similar to some sort of cardiovascular issue, some sort of like infarction. And it turned out, to be gastrointestinal. And then essentially they found out that, he was producing these gallstones that had essentially got lodged in his pancreas and had resulted in near organ failure, near organ death of his pancreas. And that's what was causing all this pain and discomfort. Because these bile ducts were obstructed by these gallstones, his pancreas wasn't working, and that caused not only the organ failure of his pancreas, but also, partial organ failure of most of his other organs. And He spent, I feel like weeks. It felt like a month, maybe 5 weeks at the Winchester Medical Center, and then he came home. And we thought everything was gonna be okay, but the pain didn't subside, and he went back, and they just couldn't do anything for him. So they took him to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, which, shout out to Johns Hopkins. I doubt that anyone from Johns Hopkins will ever listen to this podcast. But anyone associated with Johns Hopkins or anyone associated with Baltimore, thank you all. Johns Hopkins is widely regarded as one of, if not the best hospitals in the world. And I felt that he was in good hands. He's had to deal with a number of procedures to, deal with his infections, to deal with I guess he had pneumonia that had come from his weakened immune system. The other day when I was talking to him, he has a continuous drain from his pancreas for, I guess, all the infected fluid in his pancreas and his gastrointestinal system. And he also, I guess, had some sort of intubation, if I'm using that term correctly, into his lungs. I think it was like through his back to drain fluid in his lungs, which is one of my biggest, that's in like my top 5 biggest medical fears. One is a spinal tap, obviously. 2 is entering through my navel, and 3 is impaling my lungs. Obviously I have issues with open heart and open brain surgery, but that's worst comes to worst. I feel like at that point I probably would just accept it. So, it's been rough, and he's been extremely weak, extremely medicated. It's touch and go. It was about as touch and go as it can be for someone who's 25 years old. And luckily it seems that as I'm recording this, he's on some sort of upward trend. He seems to be healing, recovering. His mom visited him this weekend, which was the first person he's seen in who knows how long. So, I think Jose is hopefully going to be okay. This was a big scare, and eventually, they're going to have to remove his gallbladder. Well, obviously, his pancreas needs to heal because of how significant the pancreas is to your body. I became I don't want to call myself an expert, but I definitely did some research into what exactly the pancreas is, and what exactly the pancreas does, and how exactly the pancreas does it, and what insulin is, and how blood glucose works, and how it's basically like a buffet line, or like it's like the mall where there's like a sushi restaurant and there's like a conveyor belt of sushi. That's like the glucose in your bloodstream, and then the insulin is like when you pick up the spring rolls, and you're like an organ that needs the glucose to do whatever it does. It needs energy. So you as an organ, use this insulin to get this glucose into your organ to the mitochondria. I know I'm doing things or whatever. Essentially, this isn't 100% accurate, but yeah, it's kind of like that. And so, without his pancreas, this similar to diabetes, your blood has too much glucose, and your organs don't have enough to function. And so, yeah, he has to deal with that, and then obviously remove his gallbladder so gallstones don't fight back. Return of the Empire or whatever. Empire Strikes Back. But, those medical bills are going to be extreme. I think he spent 4 or 5 weeks, I said, in the Winchester Medical Center. Plus he's, spent 2 weeks in Johns Hopkins, which I assume that because they're the best hospital in this hemisphere, they're probably not the cheapest hospital in this hemisphere. So, anyone listening, if you want to check out his GoFundMe page, read more about his story, read more about his family story. Shout out to Kelsey for putting that together, for, writing it up, making the page. Shout out to Elsie and Victoria for really sharing it, and everyone else who shared it, and everyone who's given. I'd like to thank, I don't know if he's listening, but I'd like to thank an anonymous donor who donated. I donated on his behalf. to the cause. I'd like to thank him. I'd like to thank everyone who's given. And, if you can find it in your hearts to, if you can't give, if you don't have any money to spare, I know money's tight. Trust me, I know. At least share it, and hopefully it gets in the right hands, and maybe, the guardian angels out there can help him out. So from the 19th, we move on to January 20th. And January 20th was a pretty big day in the history of humanity. So President-elect Joe Biden became President of the United States, Joe Biden, and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris became Vice President Kamala Harris. She became the first female vice president, the first black vice president, the first vice president of Asian descent, and really the first kick-ass vice president, in my opinion, since Mr. Al Gore. And it was a great ceremony. Obviously, there was a lot going on surrounding the Capitol and the inauguration and the transfer of power. But I think it went over pretty well. I think Lady Gaga is absolutely stunning. I think that she really stole the show in a way that we thought white supremacy was going to steal the show. We thought maybe Neo-Confederacy was going to steal the show. Instead, it was the ever-beautiful and ever-talented Lady Gaga. The poem reading was beautiful. I've heard that young lady will be performing for the Super Bowl coming up next Sunday, which, imagine in a, I guess, Colin Kaepernick, post-Colin Kaepernick NFL, having this young lady come and read this poem, or whatever she chooses to read. It's symbolic. I hopefully it leads to more change than just some sort of show. But yeah, it was a great ceremony. I can't get these images out of my head. Obviously, the number one image from the inauguration was Bernie Sanders in his homemade mittens. That really took the world by storm. It's become one of the biggest memes I think I've seen in the last 5 years. I think that Bernie Sanders and his mittens is almost as big as the Drake memes from like 2015, where he was the crying Drake, or Drake in the car with the window rolled down. He said, "Get in, loser, we're going crying," or Drake. And I guess it was a music video with like Rick Ross. He's doing the step, lean back, That one was everywhere on Twitter. I think that Bernie Sanders is really up there with Drake in terms of memes. And Bernie Sanders, being the hero that he is, used that meme, turned it into merchandise, and then sold that merchandise where the proceeds went to charity. So, pardon me, I'm going to take a drink. So, yeah, that's remarkable. Additionally, all the beautiful women at the inauguration, and they all wore their, I guess, monochromatic pastels. That was pretty cool. I think that, I don't know if they coordinated it or not, but very interesting style. Especially, I guess it was Joe Biden's grandchildren. They all dressed in those singular color outfits. Reminded me of like a Jackie Kennedy style. Who else? Obviously, the Obamas looked as fly as ever. Who else really stood out? I mean, I enjoyed seeing the Clintons, just because, I'm a fan. What was another image that really stood out? I think that Mike Pence being there was significant. I think that was an image that I'm really going to hold on to. And when Kamala was sworn in, and he was there. And, the different glances that she gave him throughout the day, very reminiscent of their vice presidential debate. But there seemed to be a mutual respect, and I think that he was really trying to shy away from that Trump insurrection image. And having the Harris family at the send-off for former Vice President Pence and his wife, which was traditionally ceremonial of the president exchanging power, is sort of like a ceremonial aspect of the exchange of power, not with the inaugural ceremony, but with, hey, this is us saying goodbye, welcoming you to this home, to this post. But because the Trumps weren't present, which was a blessing, it was the Harris family, our vice president and the second gentleman, saying goodbye to former Vice President Pence and his wife. So that was pretty cool. I think that image was pretty powerful. It is something to note that my cousin and his wife were there at the inauguration because they're members of the Virginia National Guard. So in sort of a weird, bittersweet blessing in disguise, my cousin and his wife did get to see the inauguration of our 46th president and our vice president, and how historic her assuming that position is. They got to be present and witness the inauguration of, as I said, our first female vice president, our first black vice president, our first vice president of Asian descent. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty historic. Obviously, they were working. They were tired. They were, going 24/7 at, full speed, 100 miles per hour. But just to be there, I think later in life, when they have kids or when they watch some sort of documentary about the moment, they'll feel a sense of pride and accomplishment in being there. I was a little jealous. Obviously, I was glad I didn't have to work. I was glad that I didn't have to be armed in case of another insurrection or coup attempt. But I was jealous of them being there. Like A-Rod got to be there. You know what I mean? Anyway, so moving on from January 20th. This is just a quick jump to last weekend. Nothing too crazy about last weekend. But Brian and I did get to check out the store in Winchester. I think it's called Bin 5 or 5 Bin or I don't know, something or other. It's basically a store that's stocked with Amazon returns and Amazon merchandise that for some reason or another people didn't want, and that ended up in this random store. I have no idea how the process works now that I think about it. Regardless, we got to check out the store, purchased a number of cool things. Let's see if I can remember some of the things that I did purchase. I purchased this cool watch band for my Apple Watch. It's carbon fiber and kind of like a rose gold or a tan metal, so it matches the Jeep. I picked up one of those, I don't want to call it a microscopic camera, but it's like I guess kind of like a scopic camera that you can put up your nose or in your ear or like down your throat, like in your mouth. I guess you could put it like in your butthole, but I don't know what you would see. And you can see like basically whatever. I think that the intended purpose is to find and remove earwax buildup, but you can also put it in any other orifice. And so that's what I did. I put it in my mouth and I got to see all of my filled cavities. I was looking for tonsil stones because I know that's a thing. I didn't find any, but it was cool to see like every aspect of my teeth that I'd never really seen before. Like where I really needed to floss, I guess. So I got that. I got a tripod for a camera. I guess like it's kind of like an action tripod. It retailed at like $95. So that was a pretty good steal for $5 at the store. What else did I get? Oh, I got a set of corner shelves. So 2 little shelves that can be mounted in the corner of a room at 90 degrees. I'm not sure where I'm going to put them yet, but I have some ideas. What else did I get? I'm trying to think. The big thing that I got that I'm really proud of is this bumper guard for the Jeep. And I recognized what it was immediately because, a lot of these things are boxed or wrapped and sealed, but this was, you can only wrap a bumper guard so well that you know what it is. And I found this, and it is license plate mounted. So you take off your license plate, put the guard on, and then put your license plate on, and use the screws to hold that in place. It's It's pretty cool. It's not too big, but of course the Jeep Renegade is kind of, it's like a cute Jeep. I hate saying that, but it is. A lot of people call it a girly Jeep. Shelby calls it a douchey Jeep, even though she has one. It's the color that makes it douchey. Uh, but yeah, it's just a little bumper guard, and I don't think it was made necessarily for the Jeep, like specifically, but because of its shape and size, it fits it very well. It's like a cool little mustache for the Jeep. And I want to make the Jeep more off-road. I want to make it tough, because I drive it on the beach in the Outer Banks. I take it everywhere. I've driven total miles on the Jeep in 1 year alone is like halfway around the world. Gotta take this Jeep everywhere. And since we went camping and all of my traveling for whatever reason, all my recreational work, I guess, I want it to be cool. And so I got this for $5. I think the retail, from what I could see on Amazon, it looked like it was, I don't know, somewhere around like 125 for what I saw. It probably wasn't the same one. It does have mounts for off-road lights, and apparently Wayfan is going to give me some off-road lights that came with his Miata. I know, off-road lights and Miata. So yeah, I mounted it, and it looks great. You can check that out on my Instagram. I made a post with a picture of the Jeep with this bumper guard, and it said, the Jeep is no longer stock. And I didn't get very many likes, which, as a 25-year-old white guy, typically you don't get that many likes. Once you leave high school, if you're a guy like me, you don't really get that many. You don't get that many likes. You get the loyal few, which I should make a podcast about that. But I think that people thought that I was referring to my license plate because I have a customized license plate. I got custom tags, and I think that people didn't notice the bumper guard because it fits the Jeep almost too well. And so when they saw that I said not stock, I think that they simply looked at the license plate and saw, and they were like, oh, he got custom plates. But I've had the custom plates since I think May because they were my graduation gift to myself because I really wanted customized, Dave Matthews plates. They say DMB 36, which Dave Matthews Band 36. That's my favorite song by them. The song is called Number 36 because it's the 36th song that they wrote. Now they call it Every Day. But anyway, I think that people thought that I was referring to my license plates and didn't even notice the bumper guard. But that's okay. So yeah, that's pretty much a catch up until today. I'm going to take another quick break, see where we are, and see if I have some time to throw in what happened this weekend and what to expect moving forward. So thanks for listening. We'll be right back. All right, and we're back. Again, if you've made it this far in the podcast, Shelby, she's probably the only one who will make it this far in the podcast. It's probably going to be like Shelby and Alex Pooner and Melissa Pooner. Congratulations on your engagement. Maybe Lauren Hoke. Basically, my platonic female friends. They're the ones who make it this far in the podcast, and so I appreciate that. And so I'm going to sort of give an update about this weekend, which for the people listening, the people who are this far in the podcast are the ones who already know what happened this weekend. So again, sort of a tight-knit group. If you make it this far, you're a real MVP, and this podcast is pretty much exclusively for you. So this weekend, the bill came due for our friend group beach trip, essentially. Our summer 2021 Outer Banks beach trip. I guess the gang you could call the Crispy Kooks, essentially. I feel like that. Yeah, the Crispy Kooks. So the gang is obviously Mr. and Mrs. Camacho, Mr. and Mrs. Alex Camacho, Mr. and Mrs. Wei-Fan Wu, Brian and Shelby. They're not Mr. and Mrs. yet, but they should be. Jose, and then myself. And Wei Fan had really grabbed the bull by the horns and chosen the house, and everything looked like it was going well. But as with most things in my life, they didn't. um, and so, being unemployed and in this job search, um, as a graduate, recent grad, just basically with everything going on in the world and in my life in particular, I'm unemployed. And I used to call it fun employed, but there's nothing fun about it. And so I had to ask my parents for the money to cover me for this beach trip, and my mother allowed me to pay the first payment. Um, and that was, I guess, Friday night. So Saturday morning, I wake up early because Brian and I were going to go to the store, the Bin 5. So I got up. I set my alarm for like 6:30, which, if anyone knows me, I usually don't get up until 12 noon, just because of depression. Uh, and so I got up early. I got ready. I got dressed. I had my shoes on, had my jacket on, had my gloves on. I was ready because we had to camp out for a few hours. And I'm not going to go into the details of the conversation. I'm not going to rehash this conflict I had with my mother, but it ended up we got into a conflict about my financial cost to the family, as well as sort of my financial relationship with my friend group. Just to put it in simple, unbiased, objective terms. Those were the topics of the conversation. My financial, I use burden not subjectively, but in the true definition, my financial burden to the family and my financial relationship with my friend group, being that they're all employed. Um, and it wasn't a very pretty conversation, as you can imagine. And it ended with essentially a rejection of my ability to go to the beach, and a what apparently seemed like a demanded refund of the money that I had just paid the day before, less than 12 hours before. Okay, and I've had these conflicts with my mother for years. I could get into the whole conversation I've had with different teachers and instructors and deans and people, members of higher education, as well as friends and family, about the value of higher education versus the financial burden of it. So I'm not going to get into that, but essentially, it was a difficult conversation I had to bring up with my friends in our group chat, and I did immediately, just because I wanted to rip the bandage off. I wanted to get it over with, and so I voiced my opinion of what happened, as comprehensible, as comprehensive as I could. And it was difficult. It was embarrassing. I felt lots of shame, embarrassment. I felt so little. Not little like a kid. I just felt like little. Like I could be stepped on, like a mouse or something. And Alex, I think, Brian was the first to respond, because Brian and I were communicating about how I could no longer go to the store because, if we couldn't flip the bill to go to the beach, I didn't want to flip the bill to go shop for random things that I don't need at this Amazon store. So, um, my friends responded, Alex responded, and it is what it is. So yeah, I ended up going back to bed and sulking in my self-pity. And Brian and Shelby invited me to breakfast after they got done at the store, which I appreciated. Apparently there was no option that I had to go because Shelby was going to kick my ass, which life had already kicked my ass, so I didn't know how much more I could take. It was like when you're in a fight, it's like Captain America in a fight, where he says, I can do this all day. And I didn't know if it's because I had gotten beat up by life that I could just keep going, I could do it all day, or because I had gotten beat up by life that I was on the ropes. So I got dressed and went out with them, and they had picked me up two gifts, two very thoughtful gifts from their time at Bin 5. I guess they were things that they thought that I would have bought had I gone. One of them was a microphone. The microphone's kind of janky, but the microphone stand is very useful. That's what I'm using right now. And then they bought me a massage gun. Massager, I don't know what it is called. It's essentially, it looks like a gun, but it massages you. It has different heads. Pretty cool. I used theirs. It was dope. I have lots of issues and tension in my shoulders. I've pulled a few muscles in my neck and back. So, very nice. We go to IHOP, have a great breakfast. I get the traditional chicken fried steak with gravy, scrambled eggs, and hash browns, and 2 pancakes. That's my order. And we just didn't talk about life, which was nice. Just got to sit there and joke and pretend that everything was okay, even though socially distanced, everything's bleached, everyone's wearing masks. You have to wait however long because you can't use every table. Plus everything that had happened earlier that morning. Then we went downtown to the hiking store on the Old Town Mall, which was nice. They were looking for some socks. I got to see a corgi at this liquor store downtown, which was nice. And then I got to see a Great Dane. Great Danes are my favorite breed of dog because of Scooby-Doo. This one seemed pretty young, probably between a year and 2 years old. Maybe a little bit more than 2 years, but that's pushing it. He looked like he was about or at full size in terms of height, but he wasn't super old, which is why I said about, a year and a half to 2 years, because his eyes weren't super droopy. He didn't really have the jowls, and he didn't have the droopy eyelids of an older Great Dane. And he seemed to be pretty energetic. So I'd say probably about 2 years, which is nice. Go to the store, a bunch of beautiful women in the store. When I say a bunch, I mean more of a handful, because if there's a bunch of people in a certain place, you're not going to that place. So I'll say a brief handful of beautiful women in the store. And we just have a good time. And they drop me off. They pull in the driveway, and Shelby stops me and gives me the talk, about my mental health and my depression, and her being able to sympathize and empathize with what I was going through, personally and just as a whole. And her shared experiences, and, she gave me the talk like, hey, if you're at your limit, find us and we'll either push you back from the ledge or we'll build a deck on the ledge to give you more of a limit. Essentially, that's my metaphor for it, which was nice. And, said goodbye, said I love you. I was pretty emotional and went inside, and I think I went back to sleep because that's what you do. But at that time, I had been writing this really long, I guess, message. It was in the Notes app because you just write a lot. And I mean, anyone who is emotional knows that you write things in the Notes app. And this long message just about what I've been feeling, obviously that morning, but just with everything in the last, year and a half, 2 years, sort of coming to a head. It wasn't pretty. It was not pretty at all. And I shared that with, my closest friends. And, I definitely think that it's difficult because, you need to get it out. And you need to talk to people. And that's why you have close friends. That's why you have family, family that you make, not family that you're made into. But then there's that part where you feel like you're putting them in a difficult position. It's like, I need to talk to you. I need you to hear this. I need you to see me. But making you hear this and making you see me is going to make you feel some things that a normal person would never seek out to feel. And they're negative feelings. So that's often what stops people from saying them in the first place. But it had to be said. And I shared it with my closest friends. The ones that I thought really needed to hear it, and the ones who had really been there for all of it for the last 2 years. Um, and, they weren't pretty conversations that I had with these people. Um, they were healthy in the sense that it was good to talk about them, but they weren't pretty. But they were there. At the end of the day, as much as I felt alone, I wasn't. And it was nice in a weird way. And I don't necessarily think that those relationships are going to be the same. Not that they have ever been the same, in a way that they constantly change and constantly evolve. Mostly for the positive, I'd say. But I think that this was definitely a day in particular, a moment in particular, in space and time, where obviously those relationships were going to change, but they were going to change in a very drastic way. Because now these people are really seeing me. And, I don't like what I see. And they probably don't like what they see. They probably didn't like what they saw before. But now that it's all out there, they probably really don't like what they see. But that's what love is. Love is, it's not loving what you see. It's loving what's there. What's really there. So yeah, it's been a difficult month. I know all of this happened in January. Isn't that crazy? Like, for everyone listening to this podcast who's made it this far, all of what you just heard happened in the last, 3 weeks. Isn't that insane? And most of these things, the first few, all happened in the same week. The most calm week post-insurrection was the week of the inauguration of a whole new president and a whole new regime. Imagine a regime change being the most calm and most normal thing that happens in a 3-week period. And that's my month of January. And honestly, anyone who's listening to this podcast knows that that's pretty much my month every fucking month. Pardon my French. Honestly, if you're thinking, wow, this is insane. This is stupid how these things are happening. And it's so crazy that they're happening all in a month period, all in a 3-week period. This is my life on a daily basis. And I know Alex Pooner and Melissa Pooner, are listening to this, and Alex is nodding her head in agreement, and Melissa's probably laughing, because Alex knows that this is just my life. Straight up. So I'm going to take a quick break and then wrap this thing up with a recommendation and with some closing remarks. So thank you guys for listening. I love y'all. I'll be back. All right, and we're back. Again, if you've made it this far in the podcast, which if you haven't, I don't blame you, which not that you would know because you wouldn't be here to hear this, but I don't blame you. And I don't blame you if you see my long podcasts and my long messages or my long posts on Facebook or Instagram and don't read them. I get it. People don't like to read. People, for some reason, don't like emotion, public displays of emotion, or reality. People don't like realizing that they're in the matrix. But for everyone who's gotten this far, I appreciate it. Like I said, it's been a crazy month, January 2021. Moving forward, I have plans for the podcast. I had plans for the podcast starting January 6th. To be completely frank, January 6th podcast was going to be a list of my most anticipated films of 2021. That was going to be the second episode of the podcast. It was going to be most anticipated films of 2021 with a rundown. It was going to be a list with a bunch of honorable mentions. It was going to be very well put together. And then literally the day I was going to record this, the Confederates tried to start a second civil war. So obviously I couldn't talk about that. And then since the 6th, you guys have seen that a lot of things have happened, as I've listed in this podcast. But moving forward, obviously I intend for them to be more positive. I intend there to be some fun episodes, some exciting episodes, and more about the world and about things on a larger scale, like a macro scale, than on a micro, personal, intimate, egocentric scale. But we'll see how it goes. So yeah, let's to wrap this up. If I could give a recommendation, which I steal this idea from Rhett and Link and their Ear Biscuits podcast, they always give a recommendation at the end. I think that my recommendation would probably, besides the Bin 5 store and the great deals that they have, and thrift stores everywhere, the Goodwill, Salvation Army, I guess that my recommendation would just be to breathe, to pick your battles, to know when enough is enough, to know when to step away, to know when to fight, to know when to hold them and to know when to fold them. No, but seriously, I think my recommendation would be know your limits. And not just know your limits, but exercise those limits. Don't just be like, this is too much for me, or I'm at my breaking point, or whatever. If you get to those points where things are too much, where you're going to break, stop. Stop and breathe. Don't break. Don't keep going and break when you know or knew when you should have pulled away. So establish your limits, recognize your limits, and exercise your limits. And if you can do those three things, you'll be okay. You may feel like straight donkey ass. You may feel like shit. You may have to text your friends that, there's no end to the mortal suffering. But do that. Establish your limits. And it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be, a great day in your relationships. But if your relationships are true and real, and the love is actually there, and the respect is actually there, your relationships will survive. Because relationships aren't just hanging out and having fun and taking pictures and the good times. The relationships are actually there. The good times are there so that when you hit the bad times, you have something to build on, something to stand on. So, yeah, my recommendation is to find your limits, set your limits, and hold true to those. Exercise your limits. I also, ask that anyone listening check out the GoFundMe page for Jose. And also, I think there's a GoFundMe page floating around for Holly Ogilvie. She has a married name now, which I can't remember off the top of my head. She'll always be Holly Ray to me, but Holly Ray Ogilvie, she's dealing with another battle with brain cancer, just like what took my Uncle Bob earlier this month. And, she's a new mother, a new wife. She's, such a beloved and integral part of this Winchester, Frederick County community. And, if you can find it in your hearts to, if you can't give, at least share. So we can get these young people out of the hospitals and back to living their lives as much as they can. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Again, I appreciate everyone who tuned in, everyone who hit the line. I can't thank you guys enough for this opportunity. I love you all to death. And yeah, so this is, what's today? What did I say today was? Monday, February 1st, 2021. This is Late Nights with Lance, Winchester's favorite and only late night talk show host. I'm your host. Yeah, I messed that up. That's okay. I'll do it again. This is this is Late Nights with Lance, Winchester's favorite and only late night talk show. I'm your host, Lance Gunner Wines. I make mistakes. I'm not perfect, but I'm still here. So, love y'all. Peace. I'll see you around.